At the very start, we meet a cleaning lady named Thony working a wedding. One of the guests comes up to her and tells her she's too beautiful to waste her looks on cleaning. Thony is offended and tries to brush him off, but he keeps pushing to chat her up. Another cleaner, Fiona, steps in to defend Thony and jabs the guy in the neck. He starts choking and drops to the floor. Thony rushes to help and stabilizes him because, as it turns out, she's actually a doctor. Thony and Fiona slip out before the police arrive, and we learn that Fiona is Thony's sister-in-law. Both women came to the U.S. without papers, Thony from Cambodia and Fiona from the Philippines, though they'd both been living in the Philippines. Thony tells Fiona that what she did could have gotten them in serious trouble. If the cops had shown up, they would have discovered they're undocumented and deported them. When they get home, Thony scrubs down before stepping into her son Luca's room. He has an immunodeficiency and can catch an infection from anything. We learn Luca needs a bone marrow transplant, a procedure she can only get for him in the U.S. Thony left her husband behind in the Philippines and fled with Luca to America to try to save him. Later, we see Thony on the phone with her husband, Marco, who's angry that she's been in the States for 8 months and still hasn't managed to get Luca the surgery. Thony insists the process is complicated, but reassures him that she's going to the hospital tomorrow to finally lock in the date. She hangs up, puts Luca to bed, and the next day heads back to work, this time at a boxing ring. We find out that the boxing ring is owned by a man named Sayo, who organizes illegal fights there. After one of the matches ends, Thony begins cleaning the place, but suddenly she hears noises. To her shock, she witnesses a gang confronting Sayo and killing him. Terrified, Thony tries to hide, but her phone rings at the worst possible moment, giving away her position. The gang drags her in front of their boss, Armin, to decide her fate. Thony desperately pleads for her life, promising she won't tell anyone what she saw. She quickly offers him something valuable, her skills. As a doctor, she knows exactly how to remove blood and traces of evidence so the police won't find anything. Armin is intrigued by the idea and agrees. Thony immediately gets to work, cleaning the crime scene with professional precision and leaving no trace behind. Once she's done, Armand drives her back home. The next day, Fiona notices how unsettled Thony looks and tries to get her to open up, but Thony refuses to say a word. Instead, she asks for Fiona's car keys so she can take Luca to the hospital. Fiona warns her to wait. Doctors could discover her undocumented status, but Thony insists she can't waste more time. Her son's life is slipping away. She reassures Fiona that she tricked the doctors into believing she's a U.S. citizen. At the hospital, Thony asks the receptionist about Luca's surgery date, only to be crushed when told that nothing has been scheduled. Her paperwork has expired, and without valid documents, they can't move forward. Thony feels hopeless, not knowing what to do next, when she suddenly notices one of Armand's men watching her. She approaches him and tells him she wants to meet Armand. Thony goes to see Armin and tells him she wants nothing to do with his world. She doesn't need any more problems. But Armand makes it clear that he wants her to work for him, cleaning up after his operations. He hands her cash and a new phone, promising protection for her and her son if she obeys, but warning he won't be able to protect her if she goes against his orders. Fearing for Luca's safety, Thony has no choice but to agree. She makes one request. Armin must help her with the bone marrow transplant procedure for her son. With full confidence, Armin assures her he'll take care of it that very day. Back home, Fiona notices Thony still seems stressed and suggests they go out, but Thony refuses, saying she's too drained over Luca's situation. Just then, the hospital calls with surprising news. They've scheduled Luca's procedure for the end of the week. Thony is shocked and asks how that's possible. They tell her doctor, Soroyan, put in a special recommendation. Immediately, Thony realizes the doctor is connected to Armin. Relieved and overjoyed, she tells Fiona she's changed her mind and agrees to go out with her that night. That evening, they arrive at a grand party in a hotel. Fiona surprises Thony by saying the hotel owner is willing to hire them, but with one condition. They'll have to sell contraband to guests while working. Thony flat out refuses, arguing this would ruin their future, and gets into an argument with Fiona about the risk. In the middle of it, Thony receives a call from Armin, who orders her to meet him at a nightclub. Within minutes, she arrives, and Armin tells her his wife is hosting a big party at their house. He needs the place spotless, leaving no trace afterward. The next day, when Armin returns home, he's astonished at the job Thony has done. The house is immaculate. Impressed by her effort and skill, Armin praises her, hands her a generous amount of money, and leaves. Back at home, Thony is stunned to discover that Fiona went ahead with her plan and is now working in drug distribution. Furious, Thony argues with her and begs her to think about her children's future. In the middle of this fight, Arman calls Thony and tells her to meet him at Sayo's warehouse. When she arrives, Arman explains that the police are coming to inspect the place and orders her to clean the warehouse and the boxing ring thoroughly, erasing anything that could incriminate them. Meanwhile, Arman meets with his boss, Hayak Barsamian. To Arman's shock, Hayak has planted explosives in Sayo's warehouse to wipe out all evidence. Horrified, Arman rushes back, knowing Thony is still inside cleaning. He manages to drag her out just seconds before the blast, but not without being injured in the leg. Thony immediately treats his wound with expert skill, leaving Arman deeply impressed. The next day, Thony decides to surprise her son by building him a sanitized basketball court near the house, a safe space where he can play without risk of infection. Soon after, Arman calls again, summoning her to meet him. What Thony doesn't know is that she's already under surveillance by an FBI agent named Garrett Miller. That night, while Thony is working at the casino gym, she goes to clean the restrooms. Miller walks in, carrying his infant daughter, and politely asks if he can use the women's bathroom to change her, since the men's is occupied. Thony agrees, but once inside, he drops the act. He admits he's a federal agent and tells her he knows everything about her, including the fact that she's undocumented. He threatens to have her deported if she doesn't cooperate, pressing her for details about what she was doing at Sayo's boxing ring. Thony insists she's just a cleaning lady, working in many places to earn money. When Miller bluntly asks if she knows someone named Arman, Thony tenses up but denies it. Just then, Fiona walks in and Miller calmly excuses himself and leaves, letting them sweat in silence. Arman calls Thony and tells her to come to a location he'll send her immediately. Within minutes, she arrives at a large warehouse and asks what he needs. Arman tells her he needs the place cleaned thoroughly and every trace of blood erased. Thony tells him she can't keep doing this job and asks him to leave her alone. She won't put her son's life at risk. Arman replies that her life will be in danger if she walks away, because anyone who leaves the organization ends up dead, and he stresses that he doesn't want her killed and is doing all this to protect her. Thony, shaken by his words, decides to back down. A few hours later, she finishes cleaning and gets ready to leave, but she notices one of Arman's men acting very nervous and suspects he's planning something dangerous. She doesn't pay it much mind. At that moment, she gets a message from Fiona. The police have arrived at the gym. Thony rushes over and finds Miller questioning Fiona. She yells at him to leave them alone, grabs Fiona, and leaves. Back home, she finds Luca running a high fever and realizes his medicine has run out. The regular pharmacist's phone is off, and there's no solution except to take him to the ER. In the end, she decides to take her son to Arman. When they arrive, they're refused entry because she's with a small child. But Arman sees them, comes over, and asks what brought her there. Thony tells him Luca is sick and begs him to help her get into the hospital without asking for her papers. So Arman takes them to the hospital where Dr. Soroyan works. The doctor shocks them with news that Luca has developed liver damage, so he's rushed to the ICU, where the medical team manages to bring down his fever. Meanwhile, Arman receives a call from his boss Hayak Barsamian and goes to meet him. Shortly afterward, Arman summons Thony to his warehouse. When she arrives, she finds Arman standing with Hayak, who is furious that Arman has kept Thony alive this long. Arman argues that Thony is smart and invaluable at covering their tracks, but Hayak isn't convinced and pulls a gun on her. Thony quickly speaks up, asking for a chance to prove her loyalty. She tells them she noticed one of their men acting suspiciously when she was cleaning the warehouse and suspects he's been stealing their merchandise. Arman investigates and discovers she's right. The man was stealing from them. Hayak, impressed by her sharp instincts, agrees to spare her life since she's proven her loyalty. Later, back at the hospital, the doctor reassures Thony that Luca's condition has stabilized, but his liver problems remain worrying. He also praises Thony's intelligence. Her quick diagnosis helped guide his treatment correctly. At the same time, Miller is seen with a fellow agent named Sarah. He shows her photos of Thony with Arman and points out that Thony lied to him, claiming she didn't know Arman. He tells Sarah that he's going to turn Thony into his informant to feed him intel on Arman and the rest of the syndicate. The next day, Luca is discharged from the hospital. Thony is taken aback when she sees that her son has drawn a picture of Arman, now viewing him as the superhero who saved his life. Moved, Thony goes to Arman, thanks him for everything he's done, shows him Luca's drawing, and tells him how deeply grateful she is. Then she asks if he can give her more hours of work because she needs the money now more than ever. The next day, Thony brings Luca to the hospital for his long-awaited bone marrow transplant. But the doctor delivers crushing news. The surgery has to be postponed because Luca's liver is badly damaged. If they proceed, he might not survive the operation. The doctor explains they'll need to run tests to assess his liver function before setting a new date. Thony is devastated, overwhelmed by frustration and fear. Then, Miller shows up at the hospital. He tells her he's uncovered her lies and threatens to have her deported unless she works for him, and reports everything about Armin. Thony lashes out, calling him heartless. If he sends her away, he'll be condemning her son to death. She storms off, furious and hopeless. That night, she heads to her job at Armin's nightclub and sees something that rattles her. Armin torturing one of his own men. She hadn't imagined he could be so ruthless. The following day, she meets Miller and agrees to cooperate. Miller tells her that Hayak Barsamian is throwing his daughter's wedding in 2 days, and he wants Thony to bring him the names of every guest who will be attending. On the day of the wedding, Thony is there working, cleaning and observing. Armin carries a guest list with all the names Miller is after. Thony waits until Armin leaves his office, then sneaks in and takes photos of the list. Suddenly, Hayak's son Tarek walks in and accuses her of stealing. He insists on searching her, but Armin arrives just in time to shield her and defuse the situation. The next day, Thony meets Miller but lies, telling him she wasn't able to get the list. Later, she speaks with Luca's doctor again, only to be hit with another devastating blow. Luca's condition has worsened, and he won't be able to undergo a bone marrow transplant unless he has a liver transplant first. The next day, Thony and Fiona meet with Luca's attending physician and ask about the identity of the donor who was supposed to provide bone marrow. The doctor stuns them. The donor changed his mind and won't go through with the procedure. Thony begs him to give her the donor's name and address so she can try to persuade him herself, but the doctor refuses. Those details are confidential. They step out of the office crushed, but then Thony gets an idea. She waits until the doctor leaves his desk, slips back into the office, quickly copies the donor's information, and hurries out. She learns the donor is a Filipino man named Joe. That night, back home, Thony calls her husband and tells him Luca has liver damage caused by his weak immune system, but she's convinced his liver will recover if they can proceed with the bone marrow transplant. She tells him not to worry. Tomorrow, she's meeting the donor, and she's sure she can convince him to help. The following day, Thony and Fiona drive to Joe's home address. His daughter answers the door and says he moved out a while ago, then gives them the address of his car dealership. They head there and plead with Joe to reconsider. He's the only compatible match for Luca. Joe says he'll donate, but only on one condition. They have to pay him $100,000. Thony calls him selfish and heartless, reminding him that Luca's life is in his hands, but he doesn't budge. No money, no donation. Devastated, Thony and Fiona leave. Afterward, Thony meets with Miller. He tells her he thinks she's playing him and holding back information. Then he hands her a pen-shaped recorder and orders her to plant it near Armin. It's clear Thony doesn't really want to hurt Armin, but she takes the pen anyway, forced to follow Miller's orders. That night, she arrives at Armin's nightclub and starts cleaning near him, ready to plant the recorder. Just then, Armin calls out to her and tells her not to start cleaning until the guests have left. Thony covers, saying she was just distracted. He senses something's bothering her and asks what it is. Thony admits the donor has backed out and won't help her son. Armin is visibly upset for her and reassures her not to worry. He'll take care of it and make sure the donor goes through with the operation. The next day, Armin heads to Joe's car dealership and demands he change his mind, but Joe flatly refuses and walks away. Left with no alternative, Armin kidnaps him and locks him in the warehouse. When Thony arrives and sees Joe tied up, she's horrified. She insists this wasn't what she wanted, but Armin tells her there was no other choice. Thony tries calmly talking to Joe, hoping to convince him, but he remains unmoved. At that moment, Armin gets a call from one of his men, Tom, warning him that federal agents are on their way to his hotel and will be searching his room in minutes. Armin orders Thony to rush there and retrieve Tom's laptop before the FBI finds it. She races to the room, grabs the laptop, and slips out just before Miller arrives. The laptop is gone, but Miller finds Thony's necklace on the floor, a clue tying her to the scene. Afterward, Thony returns to Joe and tells him she won't force him to do anything he doesn't want to. Instead, she offers to drive him home to make up for what he's been through. On the way, one of the car's tires loses air, forcing them to pull over and deal with it. Luca calls his mom at night, asking her to sing to him before bed. The moment deeply moves Joe. He opens up to Thony, telling her that years ago his wife went in for a simple hernia surgery, but tragically died during the procedure. Ever since, he's been terrified of hospitals and operations. But hearing Luca's voice stirs something in him, and he surprises Thony by saying he'll donate his bone marrow after all. A few days later, the transplant takes place. Luca finally gets the operation he so desperately needed, and Thony is overwhelmed with relief and happiness. To show her gratitude, she invites Joe to her home. As a surprise, she even brings his daughter, whom he hasn't seen in years. The reunion is emotional. His daughter tells him how proud she is and embraces him warmly. The next day, Thony, Fiona, and their coworkers are cleaning a bus when ICE agents suddenly raid the place. They're all arrested and taken to a detention center where many other undocumented immigrants are being held. After a few hours, Thony is pulled out and brought face to face with Miller. She's stunned to learn he was the one who tipped off immigration. He tells her it's her own fault because she keeps lying to him. He shows her the necklace he found in Tom's hotel room and informs her that Tom was killed the previous night. He asks if she knows anything about who might have done it. Shocked, Thony insists she has no idea. Miller lets her go, but tells her she'll have to bring him information on the gang if she wants Fiona released. He demands she retrieve Tom's missing laptop for him. That night, Thony returns to Armin's nightclub and notices he's tense and stressed over business problems. She tries to comfort him, and for the first time, she begins to see that Armin has a good side, someone who doesn't truly deserve betrayal. Feeling guilty, she decides to come clean. Thony confesses that the FBI has been watching him and that they forced her to act as their informant, but she reassures him that she hasn't told them anything that could hurt him. Armin is blindsided by her admission, stunned and hurt, and in the end, he throws her out. The next day, Thony meets Miller, completely broken down and in tears. She tells him she couldn't get any useful information on the gang and begs him to take her out of the arrangement because she can't handle it anymore. But Miller refuses and coldly threatens that Fiona will be deported back to the Philippines if Thony doesn't cooperate. That same day, Thony meets Armin after he calls her in. He admits that his boss has forced him to do terrible things and that he's made a lot of mistakes in his life because of it. Then he shocks her. He decides to work with her. Armin hands her Tom's laptop and tells her to deliver it to Miller, assuring her he's already wiped anything that could incriminate him. He makes her promise never to share anything without checking with him first, explaining that he'll guide her on what information she can safely pass along. Thony thanks him sincerely. Later, she goes to Miller and tells him she has the laptop, but she won't hand it over until Fiona is released. They head to the detention center, only to discover Fiona has already been transferred to a deportation van. Miller tracks down the vehicle, and together they intercept it. Fiona is pulled out, shaken and sobbing as she collapses into Thony's arms. The following day, Thony decides to confess everything to Fiona about her involvement with the gang. Fiona is stunned and furious that Thony kept such a dangerous secret from her. They argue bitterly. Thony insists she stayed quiet only to protect her, but Fiona refuses to accept her reasoning. Soon after, Thony meets with Luca's doctor again, only to be hit with another devastating setback. The doctor tells her that Luca's liver hasn't improved, even after the bone marrow transplant. He explains that Luca now needs a full liver transplant. But because Thony is undocumented, the hospital can't proceed without official identification papers, making the surgery nearly impossible. Thony thanks the doctor and starts to leave, but he stops her and tells her there's only one option left, the black market, because there are many donors there willing to give a piece of their liver for money, and the black market can also arrange a hospital to perform the transplant without requiring identity papers. The idea excites Thony, so she goes to tell Armin about her son's situation and asks for his help finding a contact in the black market. Armin takes her to see an organ broker, but the broker says Armin can't accompany them into the dealer's compound. The broker then asks Thony to ride in the car that will take them to the location, and she's surprised to find many people inside the vehicle, including a little girl named Lizzie. When they arrive, Thony meets the boss of the traffickers, Donna, who explains that people come there to donate organs in exchange for the traffickers arranging residency in the U.S. Donna says Luca's operation will cost $70,000, which shocks Thony. She tells Donna she can't afford that. Donna replies that doing the operation abroad would cost at least $200,000 and that most of the money goes to the medical crew. Thony offers to help in the surgery herself. She's a doctor and could reduce the costs. Donna considers this and then proposes an alternative. Thony performs 3 illegal kidney transplants for them in exchange for doing Luca's liver transplant for free. Overjoyed, Thony immediately agrees. That night, she goes home and tells Fiona about Donna's offer. Fiona warns her that these operations are illegal and begs her to think twice before making any decision. Thony is shaken when she gets a call from Armin, who tells her to meet with Miller and feed him false intel, specifically that she saw 3 trucks of weapons outside Barsamian's warehouse. Confused, she asks why he wants her to say something like that, but Armin demands she follow orders without questioning. The next day, she meets Miller and tells him about the supposed shipment leaving the warehouse that day. She then asks him to help her with her residency papers. Miller promises he'll push the paperwork quickly if she keeps giving him information. When she insists that she's told him everything she knows, Miller grows impatient. Later, we see the supposed weapons convoy on the road, with Miller tailing them, only to discover the truck is empty. Furious, Miller realizes Arman is playing him. Meanwhile, Barsamian thanks Arman for protecting his shipment and tells him that without his intervention, he'd already be in prison. As a reward, he shocks Arman by transferring ownership of his hotel into Arman's name. On the other side, Miller vents to his colleague, saying that both Thony and Arman are deceiving him. He decides to change tactics and stop trusting Thony blindly. The following day, Thony prepares to assist with her first kidney transplant under Donna's supervision, but she's horrified when she discovers the donor is Lizzie, the little girl she rode in with earlier. Thony flat out refuses to operate on a child and clashes with Donna, furious that she approved harvesting an organ from someone so young. Donna coldly tells her that Lizzie's parents made the decision for money and that children are operated on here every day. But Thony stands her ground. She refuses to perform the surgery and storms out. That night, Thony goes to Arman's club. He notices she's crying and asks why. She tells him she's given up on the surgery for Luca and explains what happened that morning. Wanting to comfort her, Arman pulls her into an embrace, and the moment turns unexpectedly intimate. Realizing what she's doing, Thony quickly pulls away and rushes home. When she arrives, she finds Fiona crying tears of joy. Fiona tells her Marco has just arrived from the Philippines. Thony is shocked, but happy to see her husband, and they all celebrate together late into the night. Later, Thony slips away to take a call from Arman, stepping aside so Marco won't notice. Suspicious. Marco can't help but wonder who is calling his wife at such an hour. Thony meets Arman to clean up after one of his crimes. During their time together, Arman surprises her by saying he's decided to help cover the costs of Luca's surgery. Thony thanks him and also mentions that Marco has arrived in America. It's clear Arman is unsettled by the news, though he tries to mask it. Back home, Fiona warns Thony that Marco is upset about her leaving the house late at night and insists she sort things out with him. The next day, Thony finally confesses to Marco that she's been working with the gang, telling him that Arman, her boss, has offered to help pay for Luca's treatment. Marco explodes in anger, insisting that Arman must want something in return. Thony defends Arman, saying he's a good man who only wants to help their son. Hurt that she's defending another man, Marco snaps back that he doesn't approve of any of this. That night, Thony goes to Arman's nightclub to thank him for his support. Arman tells her it's the least he can do and promises that he'll soon cover the full cost of Luca's operation. At that moment, Marco shows up, furious. He confronts Arman and demands he stay away from his wife. Thony yells at Marco to leave immediately. From across the room, Nadia, Arman's wife, watches suspiciously, convinced there's more between Thony and her husband than he admits. When she later asks him, Arman insists nothing is going on, explaining that he's only helping Thony because her situation is desperate. The next day, Thony meets Miller. He says he knows about an upcoming weapons delivery by Arman and wants her to track him and report everything so they can catch him red-handed. What Thony doesn't realize is that this is part of Miller's plan. He's certain she'll warn Arman, so he's deliberately setting up the deal to entrap both Arman and Barsamian at once. True to form, Thony runs to Arman and tells him everything. Arman is furious. Now he'll have to postpone the deal. He explains he had to give her part of the profits to help pay for Luca's surgery. Thony, heartbroken, tells him not to worry. She'll find a way herself. That night, she comes home to discover Marco is missing, and Fiona tells her his phone has been off since morning. Thony immediately suspects he's gambling again. She checks her stash and finds her money is gone. Marco has taken it all. It confirms her fear that he's relapsed. In truth, Marco is gambling desperately, hoping to win enough to cover Luca's surgery, but just like before, he loses everything. The next day he returns home, and Thony explodes at him for stealing the money. Marco fires back, saying he only gambled for their son. He refuses to let a stranger pay for Luca's treatment. But Thony has had enough. She screams at him, saying she's tired of his excuses and reckless choices. Thony tells Arman she's found a donor for Luca and decided to do the surgery in Mexico since the hospitals there are advanced. But the problem is she won't be able to return to the U.S. afterward. Arman reassures her, promising he'll get her back into the States and reminding her he's still committed to covering all the costs. She asks how, since the weapons deal hasn't gone through yet, and he says he'll figure it out. Thony then suggests moving the weapons deal to Mexico, where the FBI has no jurisdiction. Arman is impressed by her idea and agrees, telling her they'll travel together. Arman goes home and tells Nadia that he's heading to Mexico for business, asking her to tell Barsamian he's gone to his hometown for his aunt's funeral. The next day, Thony, Luca, the donor, and Armin travel together to Mexico. Meanwhile, Miller shows up at Fiona's house asking where Thony is. Fiona nervously says she's at work, but when Miller presses her, she panics and throws him out. Digging deeper, Miller discovers Thony has left for Mexico with Armin. Miller then goes to Nadia and tells her that Armin is in Mexico with Thony, enjoying a romantic trip. Nadia is shocked. Armin had told her he was only handling a weapons deal. Furious, she rushes home, starts packing to leave him, but finds Barsamian waiting there. He tells her he called Armin's father to offer condolences and learned that Armin's aunt is very much alive. Demanding the truth, Barsamian pressures Nadia, and she admits she knows Armin is in Mexico with Thony and suspects he's cheating. Barsamian leaves seething, and Nadia texts her husband, warning him that Barsamian knows the truth. Panicked, Armin tells Thony he has to leave her in Mexico and return to the U.S. immediately. Trouble has erupted in his business. At the hospital in Mexico, Thony meets with the surgeon to confirm Luca's operation, but the doctor shocks her. The surgery is delayed. Another patient has been prioritized, one whose family bribed the medical team to move them ahead. Thony erupts, pleading that Luca's life is on the line, but the doctor shrugs, saying there's nothing he can do. Desperate, Thony rushes to Luca's room, administers a mild sedative, and disconnects his heart monitor. The alarms immediately trigger a panic, drawing doctors and nurses into the room. In the chaos, she confronts the surgeon again, demanding they take her son into surgery immediately. When the doctor says no surgeons are available, Thony declares that she's a surgeon herself and will perform the procedure. At first, he resists, doubting her skill, but she produces documents proving her medical credentials. With no other choice, the doctor relents. Thony scrubs in, steps into the operating theater, and, despite her nerves, successfully completes the liver transplant for Luca. Overwhelmed, she breaks down in tears of relief. Afterward, she calls Fiona with the news. The surgery worked. Fiona rejoices but warns her that Miller has already been to her house and discovered she's in Mexico. Thony must be careful. Meanwhile, Barsamian uncovers Armin's betrayal. Armin secretly stole his weapons and planned to sell them behind his back. Enraged, Barsamian vows to punish him severely. At the same time, Nadia explodes at Armin after learning the truth about his trip with Thony. Convinced he's betrayed her, she throws him out of the house. As Armin steps outside, still reeling from his fight with Nadia, Thony calls to warn him that Miller knows about their trip to Mexico. Armin tells her he already knows, then heads toward his car, but the vehicle suddenly explodes. Thony hears the blast from afar and panics. Terrified, something has happened to him. Nadia, too, rushes outside after hearing the explosion and finds her husband collapsed on the ground. She manages to revive him, and together, they flee the city before Barsamian's men can strike again. The next day, the doctor informs Thony that payment for Luca's operation still hasn't been received. She promises to call Armin to make sure it goes through. Meanwhile, Armin regains consciousness in a hotel room and phones Thony, reassuring her that he'll transfer the money to the hospital. Thony asks how she and Luca will get back into the U.S., and Armin tells her he knows a forger who can provide them with documents. Thony goes to the man who prepares passports for her, Luca, and the donor. He suggests a plan. He'll list Luca as the donor's son since she already has U.S. citizenship, guaranteeing the boy can cross the border safely. With the papers in hand, Thony, Luca, and the donor make their way to the Mexican border. At the checkpoint, Thony asks the donor to take Luca ahead, certain the police will stop her. The forged documents work. Luca and the donor are waved through, but as Thony feared, the officers refuse to let her pass. Cornered, Thony calls Miller and explains what's happened, begging for help. Miller pleads with his superior to intervene, asking her to contact the border police, but she tells him it's nearly impossible and would take too long. With no other choice, Miller decides to head to Mexico himself to try and get Thony out. Armin shows up at Barsamian's place, claiming he barely survived an assassination attempt. He tells Barsamian he suspects the last buyer he dealt with, a man who had tried to purchase their weapons at a cheap price. Barsamian presses him for the weapons location, and Armin explains they're hidden in the warehouse. He adds that he only went to Mexico to get a higher offer. With this, Armin manages to convince Barsamian that he hasn't betrayed him. Meanwhile, in Mexico, Miller arrives and meets Thony. He tells her they need to wait a few days while he arranges her return, but she refuses. Luca needs her now. Miller then suggests the only immediate option, hiding inside the trunk of a car to cross the border. Desperate, Thony agrees. During the journey, however, their car is stopped at a checkpoint. The officers open the trunk and discover Thony inside. Both she and Miller are arrested. The next day, Miller's superior arrives. She secures Miller's release, but keeps Thony detained on charges of illegal immigration. Thony is transported back to the U.S. and sent to jail. At the same time, Luca returns home safely with the donor, confused and worried about why his mother hasn't hasn't come back yet. Later, Miller and his boss interrogate Thony. They confront her, saying they know she's been working for the cartel and remind her that the gang won't protect her. Still, they offer her one last chance to make things right. They release her under the condition that she continues as their informant. The following day, Thony arrives at Arman's nightclub. Nadia spots her immediately and angrily tells her to leave. Arman intervenes, taking Thony into his office. There, Thony tells him the FBI has discovered her double role. She insists she never wanted to hurt him and confesses that he's the one person who has truly helped her. Thony suggests that Arman cooperate with the FBI to take down Barsamian, but Arman refuses. He doesn't trust law enforcement, convinced they'll betray him the moment he's no longer useful. Thony promises she'll talk to Miller and convince him of the deal. The next day, she meets Miller and tells him she can't betray Arman because he's the only one who's ever truly helped her and her son. She proposes instead that Miller work with him to bring down Barsamian. At first, Miller resists, dismissing Arman as just another criminal, but Thony insists Arman is a good man who was forced into terrible things by his boss. Reluctantly, Miller agrees. Soon after, Miller and Arman meet in a cafe. Miller offers him a deal. Give him the details of Barsamian's next weapons shipment, and he promises he won't touch Arman. Arman nods, but a few days later he changes his mind. When Thony asks why, he says he still doesn't trust the FBI, but he reassures her he'll keep his word and still help bring Barsamian down, only in his own way. He asks her to trust him. On the day of the shipment, Miller secretly watches Arman and Barsamian completing the deal in a luxury hotel. Within minutes, federal agents swarm the place, arresting both men. In the transport van afterward, Barsamian calmly tells Arman not to worry. He'll walk free because there's no evidence against him. Until then, he orders Arman to run the business and threatens to kill him if he even thinks of betrayal. But for Arman, the arrest is a victory. His plan worked. A few days later, Thony visits him in prison. Arman assures her he'll be out soon and asks when she's planning to return to the Philippines. She shocks him by saying she's not going back. She's decided to stay. Arman realizes she's staying for him, and he can't hide his happiness. That night, Thony and Fiona go to Arman's old warehouse, only to find he's signed it over to them. Thony tells Fiona it's for the medical clinic she always dreamed of, and Fiona will be her partner. Fiona is overjoyed, thanking her. Later, the two women return home, still smiling, only for Thony's world to collapse when she realizes Marco and Luca are gone. It hits her. Marco has kidnapped their son and fled back to the Philippines. Thony breaks down in tears, completely lost, not knowing what to do next. And that's where the season ends.